Hello everyone, my name is Phawx. Today I'll be doing an in-depth review on the AYANEO Slide. This isn't just another handheld console from AYANEO, it's a bold step into the future of PC gaming handhelds. I truly believe that for companies like AYANEO, they need to create novel designs that are more than simply candy bar form factors, especially since all of the big PC manufacturers are now in the game. It's more imperative now than ever for these designs to allow PC gamers to play all PC games, and they require keyboards. Speaking of design, the Slide is a hybrid of sorts, marrying the traditional candy bar design of handhelds except with the satisfying of the keyboard. The sliding mechanism is smooth and fantastically satisfying. It really reminds me of the type of action from the Sidekick series of devices, albeit that swiveled and this slides. But the action of engaging the slider is frankly addicting. The keyboard itself is a tactile experience that touchscreens simply can't match. There's a whole section in this video that focuses on the keyboard and my thoughts on it. Under the hood, the AYANEO Slide has the standard for this generation of processors, the AMD 7840U. They come in a number of configurations with differing RAM sizes and storage solutions. The base model, competitively priced at $700 and offering 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of storage. Now, I've been reviewing 7840U devices for months now, so I'll be going over gameplay as well as how this specific device handles total system power, which takes a closer look at battery life. For those new to the channel, what does that mean for us, the players? It means fairly impressive performance that can handle the latest modern titles. The games you typically reserve for your PC setup at home can now travel with you, with the only compromises being quality settings and balancing battery life. This video will be divided into a few parts. Up first, we'll be going over one of the biggest peculiarities with the AYANEO Slide, and that's with its tendency to use a bit more power than its competition. Along that same token, we'll go over temps and the device both internally and externally. After that, we'll talk about a few more system-level peculiarities, and then go into the build review, which will cover the gamepad on the device as well as the latest iteration of the AYASpace 2 app. Up first, let's talk about thermals, and then we'll start talking about the peculiarities on battery life. Starting with a 1-hour burn-in of the device running at 15 watt, it should be noted that the fan profile of the device was the default bounce profile and was in a room that is 72 degrees Fahrenheit or about 22 degrees Celsius. And looking at this graph, the red line shows you the current TDP and the yellow line shows you the temps. During the entire run, the device stayed extremely cool on die, the hottest point on the chip reporting around 55 degrees Celsius. Switching over to 23 watt, which is the default TDP for the device, with the balanced fan profile, the fan kicks up a notch and is easily audible. However, the device stays extremely cool, effectively staying at 61 degrees Celsius during the entire run. Continuing along these lines with running the AYANEO Slide at 23 watts and looking at the device through a thermal camera, again, this is keeping the fan in a balanced profile. We can see that the heat begins to radiate out, but not appreciably enough to cause any concern. Additionally, because the device is all plastic, you can see how holding the device actually wicks heat away from the external casing and helps maintain an even temperature. This is when placing like my thumb on the keyboard, you can see how the heat gets robbed away. The bottom line here is if you are okay with a bit of fan noise, you can easily run the device at 23 watts and not have to worry too much about heat. If you must play with the fan profile at mute, I personally advise not going above 18 watt TDP. Alright, now let's talk about the elephant in the room. The AYANEO Slide takes a considerable amount of power to just be on. Looking at this graph, I've split it into best case battery life and worst case battery life. The first up is worst case battery life. Effectively, if you leave the device at its default TDP of 23 watt and 50% brightness, you should anticipate around 1 hour of battery life, depending on if the game requires this. Where things get really weird is if we force 5 watt TDP, which would give us the best case battery life, what we're finding is that we're only really able to achieve around 3 hours of battery life. A best case battery life around 3 hours isn't great. Just so you can see how this works, I've animated the graph so that we can follow how TDP and total system power scales during the recording. In our worst case scenario, total system power from a 23 watt TDP starts at 40 watt and slowly scales up to using 47 watts total. This is normal behavior that we see and has to do with voltage on the battery, but considering that the battery is 48 watt hour, you can see how we're only getting 1 hour of battery life. Math works. Now, when we look at 5 watt TDP, we can see the rest of the system is taking an additional 10 watts for a total of 15 watt and slowly scaling up to 17 watts. And likewise, 3 times 15 equals 45, ergo 3 hours of battery life. What do you know? Math works. In all seriousness, this is not ideal results. While the low end isn't great, other devices also don't do well when you push power. What is total power? Well, TDP is just for the package. It doesn't include RAM, display, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, speakers, LEDs from the device, and fan. And after looking at each one of these components, right now it's looking like the display is one of the bigger culprits to using as much power as it does. When leaving the device idle, the system was using around 12 watts of power, but when disabling the screen, total system power dropped to around 8 watts. 4 watts being used for the display alone is really high for these devices, and highlights how important it is, especially for extending battery life when using very little TDP. I'll go into some other peculiarities, which will be a little tip on how you should run the device, and then we'll get into the rest of this review. Some other curiosities for the AYANEO Slide is that they've gone ahead and by the stock OS, they do not even offer a modern standby functionality. You will have fast boot and hibernate. I've gone ahead and disabled fast boot entirely, so now I only have the hibernate option. But if you were thinking about putting this device in standby or modern standby, you're not going to have that option. Effectively, you're only going to have the hibernate option. And since we have different options that will have a lot of different RAM, all of that RAM will be occupying space on your main SD card. So if you have 32 gigs of RAM, 32 gigabytes will always be occupied on your SSD because that's where it needs to hibernate to. So that's one thing to keep in mind. That's a little bit of a peculiarity. The other thing to note is that the AYASpace 2 app will actually govern the power of the device itself. So if we go ahead and jump into this, we're going to go ahead and press V here on Set Phrase Tools and then 1. And you can see that we're in a balanced setting right now. And you can see that warning, the current plan will alter performance values on its own. So if I go into the AYASpace 2 app, now by default, it's always in AAA game mode. Now, if we go ahead and look at that, I'm going to go ahead and back out of here and we'll press V and 1. And you can see that we're at high performance and warning, the current plan will alter performance values on its own. So AYASpace 2 will, by default, change things. And as it is in AAA performance mode, it sets a high performance mode, which also sets the PCI Express to off. And we want really that to maximum power saving. So AAA game mode is really only if you're pushing a lot of power on this device. Otherwise, you really should be at default using normal game from AYASpace 2 app pretty much all the time. That's just a little thing that is a little bit of the odds and peculiarities of the AYANEO Slide. All right, let's briefly start looking over what are the features and functionality of the device. Along the side, we have our contoured grip. On the bottom, we have our downward firing stereo speakers, our USB-C 4 port, the micro SD card slot. This is actually a micro SD card 7 slot. I don't even have a micro SD card 7 to actually test this with. So that's something that I have to buy to just properly be able to test this. Here we have our microphone input. Again, we have the right-hand side of the contoured grip. Along the top, we can see our analog triggers as well as our bumpers. We can see the RC and LC buttons. These are additional buttons that can be configured via the AYASpace app. We have an additional USB-C port. We have our LED indicator to let you know that the power is on, as well as the charging indicator. And then our power button that also operates as a fingerprint sensor. Along the back, we have our inlet. So this is where air comes in. And then out top, we have our exhaust. And you can see the chunky heatsink. Now, this heatsink is actually a really good performer. We're going to touch base on that more in this review. Here we are at the start of the screen, and we're just going to go ahead and use the fingerprint sensor to sign in, and just like that, we're inside of the device. We're going to be reviewing the gamepad portion of the AYANEO Slide here, and we're going to go over the features and functionality that are on the AYANEO Slide. Now, these are new Hall-based analog linear triggers. They feel a lot different than other AYANEO devices. When I first got it, it felt like it had a hair trigger. Like just holding the device where my hands felt comfortable, I was accidentally depressing like the left trigger. You can actually see it depressing right there. So I was bringing up iron sights in Starfield of all games. So I relaxed where my hands were, but you can also change that and tune that so you can have a little bit of a dead zone so that it doesn't accidentally press via the AYASpace 2 app. But going back to the triggers for a moment, these are using what AYANEO is saying their new linear Hall-based analog triggers here. So they are Hall-based instead of needing any type of potentiometer to actually depress, so there's no mechanical action for the sensitivity. It's all based on magnets. Now, the actual pressing of it is so crazy smooth. It does feel nice, plus the design of the triggers are much better than previous AYANEO entries. Some of them were just like way too swoopy, and I feel like this is far more gamer made, like how a game controller should feel. So overall, these triggers are a big improvement, probably the best ones from any AYANEO device that I've felt yet. And that goes for the bumpers as well. The bumpers and the triggers just are a pleasure to use. For those people that have used AYANEO devices before and loved like the AYANEO 2 Hall-based analog sticks, that is still probably my favorite analog stick to use on any of these devices. This is still a Hall-based analog stick, however, it's obviously smaller and has a much shorter throw, but it still has the same characteristics, and by default, where we want to do this test circularity. If you really care about creating full circles, this is something that it will do absolutely. However, you can tune this up in the AYASpace app itself. Now, unfortunately, we can only do 100 to 150. So basically, this just gives us full range here. So you can see that if you needed to, you can extend that range and make a full square. I wish that there was some degree of changing that up. The other thing that we can do here, and if I just move the right analog stick a little bit, you can see that the dead zone will kind of pop out. So it has a fairly large dead zone. However, that can be changed in the AYASpace app as well. So we'll go back to 100 here, and we'll back up here, and we're going to go to dead zones and say off. So now if I push just a little bit, you can see that I have full motion. So if you're the type of person that wants absolute fidelity and zero dead zone, that you can configure in the AYASpace 2 app as well. And last but certainly not least is the D-pad as well as the face buttons. These feature a rubber membrane underneath. You can actually hear it. These aren't as crunchy as other AYANEO devices are. It seems like I want to say that they've made it a little bit easier to depress overall. It's easy enough to kind of hover your thumb around it, and it's zero fatigue whatsoever, and it's immediately apparent when you depress it. Likewise, the placement for the D-pad is where as best as it can possibly be with this type of device and how it's going to be held. You can see that my thumb placement for how it is, I would have preferred if the D-pad could have come over a bit this way so that it could have just been offset, just would have been a little bit more comfortable for my thumb to use. However, if you just kind of reposition your hand, you can use the D-pad just fine. But overall, the D-pad, face buttons, analog sticks, and triggers, all of the buttons on there are as good as AYANEO has been doing since the AYANEO 2 and continues to be really good button inputs for the gamepad section. So this is an excellent part of this review. Moving along to the keyboard review on the AYANEO Slide. Now, I will be fake typing just so that you can see what's happening, but it's really hard to type on this keyboard through a viewfinder, and I'm not going to be getting kind of an accurate result. So we're going to be looking at this off camera, but I will be typing on this just on camera so that I can speed through it just to give you the effect of what it's like to type on this device. And then we'll be talking a little bit more as we go on that. So let me go ahead and just get a practice run on here. So there is my word per minute score as well as my accuracy. This is basically a third of my full typing speed on a keyboard. So I'm not a super fast typer, but I get around 85 word per minute on a full keyboard. So I'm basically doing nearly a third of what that is. Now, I want to say that because of the structure of the AYANEO Slide, and this has to do with all sliding types of designs, right? When you have these types of designs where the keyboard is under here, but we have controls on the left and right, it's going to force you to kind of hold the device in such a way that you're barely holding on to the grips, right? Like I only have a tenuous grip on my left and right hand just so that I can fully touch all of the keys. This is a thing that is just a part and parcel with these types of designs. When you have a clamshell design, it's going to be closer, like your hands are going to be closer to the keys so you won't have to reach as much, and you can also kind of move around a lot better. Having said that, this is in line with what I was getting with the GPD Win 3 and the GPD Win 4. So overall, the word per minute score is on the same level as the GPD Win sliding types of devices. Now let's start talking about the keyboard proper. So taking a look at the keys themselves, you can see that they're really flat and flush with the device, and that's really necessary just so that we have the capability to slide this screen up and down. If there was any type of bump to them to help with touching and feeling where you were going on the keyboard, obviously the sliding mechanism would get in the way, or it'd have to be raised in some manner just to accommodate the raised keys. So this is part and parcel with these types of designs. I'm glad that we don't have a touch interface like the Win 3 had, which was truly terrible. The Win 4 moved over to actual tactile keys, which is what the AYANEO Slide does as well, and it has the same types of trade-offs when you have the gamepad on the side. Overall, I love that the AYANEO team has gone to this direction, because these offer a more full-featured operation for Windows PC gaming and offers you an opportunity to play a lot of older games that are going to be required to use a keyboard. It makes things much, much easier, not needing to actually use a virtual keyboard. One of the nice things about the AYANEO Slide is that the screen itself can articulate. This is really awesome, and the reason why this is awesome is because one of the problems with candy bar designs, or even sliding up designs, is that they're going to be typically flat. And when they're flat, you have to change your wrists so that the screen is more comfortable for your eyes. Whereas now, because you can articulate the screen, you can actually position your hands so that they're in a more comfortable manner, like they are right now, and having the screen face where you are. So this is far better for ergonomics, and I'm actually a big fan with what AYANEO team has done here. So overall, overall, I'm a big fan on the decisions that were made for the AYANEO Slide, and that is the end of the keyboard part of this review. Let's jump into the AYASpace 2 part of this review. Now, the AYASpace is a suite of software that the AYANEO team has been developing for a number of years. We're up to iteration 2. I've been looking at the AYASpace suite of software on my channel for years now. This latest version kind of adopts a lot of different things that the Steam Deck offered, but also is a reimagining of what the AYASpace features and functionality would be. One of the things that I love is that the AYANEO team continues to improve and iterate upon it. So right now you can see that I have the Joy 2 key part of this, so the analog stick will translate to mouse controls. Now, one of the things that the AYASpace 2 app did previously is that when you would open up the AYASpace 2 app, all of your controls would still bypass that and go through to whatever is in the background app. So whenever you press that, the game would still be running and other stuff. One of the new things that it does is that when you press the AYASpace app button, typically it's going to press start as well. So it should give you a pause menu to the screen, but also it will no longer send any commands to the background, and all of your controls will just be for the AYASpace app itself, much like the quick access menu works on the Steam Deck. Very quickly, let's start going over what's available on the AYASpace 2 app. So the first thing that you're greeted with is what I think a lot of people would appreciate is very quick and easy access to FPS frame limiting as well as TDP limit controls. There is a feature for smart TDP. They have updated this a little bit. They are now starting to target CPU clocks, but not modulating CPU clocks in real time like how GPU clocks are. When you see this particular enable smart TDP, what you're actually looking at is one of the things that I had shown off years ago was that if we statically clock the GPU clock at certain different TDPs, that we could basically engineer ways that we are giving more power to the GPU, thus having the package try to redistribute power, but overall get better performance in your games. Now, Smart TDP does the same thing, but it's trying to lock things based on a FPS limit, and it will modulate the GPU clock in real time to accommodate that frame limit. Likewise, we do start to see some CPU clock limits. We're going to take a look at that in a moment, but we'll go ahead and jump down here. We can see performance overlay, and they offer two different options. There's FPS Thunder, which we already have up here, and you have a few different types of layouts that you can do. There's horizontal, and then there's vertical, and there's also simple. And then you could also just do RivaTuner Statistics Server. For this, it will actually download in the background for you automatically, whereas FPS Thunder will just kind of just work, which is really nice and straightforward for a lot of people that are looking for that simplicity to just get up and running. However, if you wanted to edit your fan curve, you can go ahead and press that edit button, and this will jump you into the AYASpace 2 app proper. Now, this is where I was talking about prior, where you can now see CPU lock. So we can actually now set a CPU clock frequency. Now, this will not modulate in real time with the smart TDP part of that. That will only be GPU fluctuation, GPU modulation. So don't think that smart TDP actually does anything with CPU just yet. I am hopeful that AYASpace 2 will adopt CPU clock modulation as well, because ultimately that is the basically the ultimate tier for auto-optimizing power based on a frame rate cap. But right now we're still just looking at a GPU cap. In the fan configuration, we can go ahead and click here, and you can see what you have available to you. So in balance is what I have, again, done for all of my thermal tests, but for mute, you can see the type of fan curve that's there. For what it's worth, mute is pretty good when you're going 15 watt, which is really what I would recommend for this particular device, especially when we start taking a look at how the battery life acts on the AYANEO Slide itself. This offers something that is near silent operation, and for what it's worth, with how good the heatsink solution is, that I never really heard it, and at 15 watt we get what is going to be the best bang for your buck in terms of performance and battery life. The volume slider is here as well, and just in case you don't want to press the volume slider buttons that are physical buttons on the device itself, we also have keyboard RGB. This is really cool, and something that the AYANEO team obviously does. We always seen the LEDs that were around the analog sticks, but now you can also select different colors. I particularly like this orange color, but you have different colors that you can choose if you want, and that will also match the analog stick colors that you want as well. So it's really up to you. You can also do a gradient, so it'll kind of flow through all the different colors. So that's up to you on what you want to choose. Last, we have a bunch of different options here, like airplane mode, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, mute, and then something here called download with screen off. If we click this, this will disable the screen so that you can download in the background while making sure your display is off. This is a nice feature and something that you can actually do on any Windows device. There's just a command that you have to give it Moving right along, we have what a lot of people I think would find interesting is Motion EX. This is in AYASpace 2. This is to enable gyro support, so you can do gyro aiming. However, there are dependencies that are not installed by this machine by default, so you need to install these and make sure that they're working. This is HitHide and Vision Bus. This is stuff that you'll need to download in the background to make sure, because those are going to need to enable another virtual gamepad support, especially if you want to do something like a DualShock, or basically mimic the Xbox 360 controller, which is what this is being presented to the system itself, and change that up so that it can be used on other platforms or other types of emulators. Going down, we have other types of options. So we have the rumble motor, and you can set that to low, medium, high. Medium is a good default. Here we have our analog triggers, and this is going to show you when we look at the gamepad tester. We'll be able to show you what that looks like. On joystick, we have sensitivity at 100% and dead zone on or off. With the dead zone on or off, you can actually specify how big of a dead zone you want. Here's our gyro adjustment, RGB mode, and custom button alignment. One other thing that you may be asking is, why would you want to disable the controller? Now remember, this is presented as an Xbox 360 controller. So internally there is a chip, an IC in here that is basically converting all this into what is presented to the Windows system as an Xbox 360 controller. That is always on. The problem with that is that if you wanted to dock this device, the Xbox 360 controller is still going to be on. So that is technically on port 1. So that'll be player 1 that no one would be able to use. And if a game is anticipating the person that has an external Bluetooth controller playing, that is technically player 2. And player 2 may not be able to sign in or do anything on the menu. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to disable the controller so that you can then use external controllers, which would then be player 1. That's just a nice little feature just to get things going in a nice, smooth manner. For instance, there is the customized part, which is not available in the quick access menu in this particular configuration. So you can do some theming and wallpapers. Likewise, if we go down to controller, you have the full fat menu here. So you'll be able to select everything that you want to do and really tailor the controller and all the lights and RGB how you want them, as well as the RC and LC buttons. One of the things definitely worth mentioning here is the custom shoulder buttons. So for LC and RC, the original AYASpace 2 app didn't have the ability to actually map custom keys to this at all. But now that we have the AYANEO Slide, we have all of our keyboard keys here as well. However, if you just wanted to have a quick key here, this is something that you can do. So in here you would have your key combination. You're going to go ahead and press Y, and that'll bring up your keyboard here. And then if you wanted this to press Q, you would say save and apply. So we're going to go ahead and say start. And now anytime that you press this button, it will be Q. So this is something that you can additionally create other macros that you want for those additional buttons. Lastly, we have a more full-featured update menu, and that's pretty much the entirety of the AYASpace 2 app. Is the AYANEO Slide for you? I'm a firm believer that Windows PC gaming handhelds are just 100% better device with a built-in keyboard. As it stands right now, there are only 3 devices that are this small while still packing an onboard keyboard: the GPD Win 4, the GPD Win Mini, and the AYANEO Slide. The AYANEO team's commitment to the AYASpace 2 app is something I genuinely like to see. Even though it's not as necessary now that we have a full keyboard on the device, still, the latest iteration solves most of my earlier gripes and feels nearly full-featured. One thing that is clearly easy to give kudos to the AYANEO team is for their latest heatsink solution that is on the AYANEO Slide. If you had desires to run this device docked a good portion of the time, you should feel comfortable knowing you can push this device to high TDPs, and the heatsink fan solution will take it no sweat. If you like AYANEO's devices, the only hesitation I would give to a full recommendation is the tendency for the system to use a lot of total system power, even when the device should be using very little power. However, if you were the type of person that would only be gaming on any of these devices at around 25 watt, what you'll find is that battery life is at least in the realm close to its competitors, and getting a screen with very good image quality, albeit still is a native portrait display, but it is excellent. I'd like to give a brief shout out to my YouTube channel members as well as my Patreon members. It really means a lot to me. Thank you guys so much for subscribing and supporting me. I hope this video is informative. As always, guys, thank you for your time, and thanks for watching.